I'm going to show you how to replace the alternator on a 4.0 V6 engine from Toyota, also known as the 1GR-FE. This engine came in many different models, but in this case, we're going to replace it on a 2008 Toyota 4Runner. The owner came to me because while they were driving, the battery light popped up on their dashboard, and they weren't exactly sure why. They stopped at the auto parts store, and they said the battery was still good. So they drove an hour home with the battery light still on, and when they tried to start it the next day, it would not start the vehicle. So with the battery completely drained and the alternator likely the culprit, we hooked up my charge tester, which I'll link to in the video description, and we jump-started the vehicle and hooked up this tester and found that the alternator was not charging correctly. These tools can help confirm that the problem is the alternator, but if you didn't have this and you just had a multimeter, you could test the output directly at the alternator. If it's not putting out about 13.5 to 14.3 volts, you know it's toast. So the first thing we need to do is remove the battery in this case, and then I'm gonna pop it on the charger to charge all night because I have a feeling this battery is still good. Loosen the 1/2 inch or 10 millimeter bolts on the battery hold down, then remove the battery hold down from the vehicle, and you can start to loosen the terminal bolts, which are also 1/2 inch nuts in this case. After you remove the terminals, and I actually did this before I tested the alternator, is I cleaned off the terminals of all the corrosion just to make sure it wasn't a connection issue. But if you haven't at this point, now is the time to clean the terminal posts on the battery and also the actual terminal ends themselves. And this is a nice tool I'll link to in the video description that'll help clean it nice and easy. Again, I did this before I actually tested the alternator and it still tested bad. Now with the battery out of the vehicle, I hook it up to my trickle charger all night, put it on charge. As it wouldn't test to see if it was good, it needs a full charge to test it. This took about 12 hours on the battery charger. You just simply hook it up to the positive and negative ends terminals. You can see here the charger screen, and it's plugged into the wall, and it'll take quite a while on one of these AGM batteries. And I'll link to this product in the video description and also link here. And although they drove a really long time on simply battery power, this battery did end up charging up and tested good. It's only a year old. Everything tested good, so we're not going to replace it at this time. We're going to keep using the old battery. The best thing to do would be to charge it up, as you need a slow charge to make it last longer. Your car charges it a bit too fast, and it might not be appropriate for the battery. This is the best way to do it. So I have enough confirmation to replace the alternator, and we're going to get back to it. First thing you do after removing the battery is just remove the battery tray that holds it. Now I'm going to show you the alternator. If you don't know what it is, it's right here. Next to it is the idler pulley, which you'll have to remove to get to it. And below that, now I'm on the other side, below the idle pulley is the tensioner pulley, that lower left-hand one. That's the one you move to remove the belt. The one above it's actually going to come off. So I got my 14 millimeter socket on the tensioner pulley. You can see I'm moving it right now. That's supposed to happen, as when you twist it counterclockwise, it gives you relief in the belt tension to remove the belt from the belt drive. You can see here I got my long ratchet with my 14 millimeter socket, and I'm going to turn it counterclockwise to release the tension on the belt. And it's actually going to move that pulley. With the tension released, I can now slip the belt off. The problem was that I found is with the belt all the way off, I then couldn't get the wrench off the tensioner. So I had to actually put it back on the belt and hang it off the alternator just like this, remove the wrench, and then I could slip the belt off by hand. Little weird fitting in there. You might be able to do it another way, but that's how I had to do it. Now the first thing we're going to remove is the wiring harness on the side. There's two 10 millimeter bolts that hold this on. There's one that I'm doing towards the front that I'm doing right now, and one just a few inches towards the rear of the engine behind it. So there's the first one, and to remove the second one and also the alternator terminal, I had to remove this little heat shield or whatever it is, also a 10 millimeter bolt. Make sure you put all your parts in a safe spot. I could then get to the cover of the alternator terminal end that came off with a little pick, and also revealed a 10 millimeter bolt that attaches the terminal to the actual alternator. Loosen that up and then remove it by hand. And you'd only want to do this with the battery disconnected or removed. So I took that terminal end off. Now we can remove the electrical plug that plugs into the alternator. It has a little push pin on the far side towards the rear of the engine, which I'll show you in a second here. When I rotate, that's what you had to push in, and it releases the clip. Now I'm going to remove another wiring harness 10mm bolt that's not on the alternator. It's actually next to the battery here. It's a ground, and we're going to clean that off later. But we're just going to remove this so I have a little more wiggle room with this wiring loom. So with those components removed, I can finally get to the 10mm bolt towards the rear on the actual alternator. That's the second one on the alternator. I couldn't film myself removing it, but there it was. Now the wiring harness moves freely, and we can work on removing the idler pulley next to the alternator, which is a 14mm socket. It's hard to film this. It was hard to get the camera in there, but I'm doing my best. So I'm simply backing it out. It came off pretty easy, a lot easier than the alternator bolts will. Now the idler pulley is removed. You have to remove that to take out the alternator. Now it's just 2 bolts that hold the alternator to the engine. Again, 14mm. These were stuck on there pretty good. I had to use my long ratchet just to loosen it up. So I'm loosening the top and the bottom ones, removing the bottom one first fully. And I simply took the 14mm off, and I could back it out by hand. Took a couple of different sockets. As you can see, that other pulley's in the way. If you need a little more room, you could actually slip that belt off to give yourself a little bit more room, a couple millimeters. Got the bottom one out. Now I'm removing the top one. And this engine has 200,000 miles on it, so it was stuck in there pretty good. I had to get my pry bar to kind of loosen it up. Now I can fish it out, the alternator, and I recommend doing it this way. There's only one real way to get it out, and you got to be careful of those air conditioning lines and the wiring harness as well, but you can slip it on past exactly like I did it. Orient it the same way, and it's going to go in the exact same way you took it out. So get the new one, and I'll link to a new one in the video description, and slip it back in the exact way you took it out. And it was hard to film, so I'm just showing you kind of like the stages I got to. Kind of flipped it over there. Now I need to match the holes up. So you can see it's lined up almost, but we just got to get those bolts in. So I worked on the top one first and kind of slipped it in, and then got the bottom one in. So this is me getting the top one in. Just getting a few threads in, 5-6 threads, just so it doesn't fall down. Now getting that one in. Again, it was hard to film all this stuff, but you just have to kind of figure it out a little bit on your own. And I tightened those down, again, 14mm. This took a little bit of time as it's very tight in there. You got to have the right sockets, the right extension. You see how that belt's in the way? You could remove that and make it a little bit easier on yourself. Took a while to tighten those down, but if you can, the manual calls for 32 pound-feet of torque. When I'm reusing bolts, I don't mind going over a little bit, so they were nice and tight. Now I'm working on getting those 10mm bolts back attached to the side. You can see I got the first one in there. It's not in all the way. It just got slipped in there, a few threads. And the other one still needs to be attached right there. So now I'm tightening down both the 2 10mm bolts that attach to the actual alternator. You can see they're tightened down now. So with those tightened, I can now attach the terminal to the actual positive end of the alternator. Came with a nice new 10mm nut. Tighten that down securely, not too tight, but tight enough. Now I can put the plastic cover back on the positive end of the alternator terminal. It clips right back on there. Now I can plug in the electrical connector, just make sure it's seated in fully, and it is clipped in. Now I want to get the belt back on, but the first thing we got to do is put this idler pulley back in. Again, this is a 14mm bolt. You're just going to work it in by hand, get it as tight as you can, and then we need to tighten it down. And I couldn't find the exact torque spec. I found a couple difference between 30 and 40 pound-feet of torque, so just get it nice and tight. I set the wrench to 40 foot-pounds of torque and gave it a little extra. It'll be fine. You could even put a dab of blue thread locker on it if you really felt inclined. So now we're back to the tensioner pulley. As we need to relieve the tension, you could have removed this top plastic cover. It might help you out. I didn't. Now I got my 14mm on there, and I'm going to try to rotate the tensioner pulley counterclockwise and slip the belt back on. Again, I just kind of slipped it on a little bit, made sure everything was lined up, moved my wrench a little bit, and then got the belt fully on. I'm going to show you what it looks like with the belt fully on. You can see everything's lined up. It's on the pulleys exactly correctly. All these ones are on as well. And I'm going to go over to the other side of the engine as well, just to show you. You need to make sure everything's lined up and it's, the belt's on everywhere it should be. We're on the home stretch now. I'm going to put on this little heat shield, a 10mm bolt. Tighten that down securely. Now I'm going to attach that wiring harness bracket. I thought it was a ground connection. I'm not even sure at this point. I can't really remember, but I did clean it off with the wire brush just in case it was. I'm going to attach that back to what would be underneath the battery tray. Tighten that down, a 10mm bolt. Nice and tight. I'm gonna go ahead and grab that plastic tray, put it back in. You just gotta orient it the right way, and there's those little holes that line up. Just sits in there. Now we can grab the fully charged battery. It took about 12 hours to charge this thing. It was really dead, especially after driving on it for an hour without the alternator working. With that in there, I'm gonna attach the positive terminal first, 1/2 inch socket, nice and tight. Do the ground next. We still gotta install the battery hold down, but we're gonna start up the vehicle and see if the battery light went away. It started right up, battery light went away. Everything seems all good again. So we can install the battery hold down now. And it's just these couple hooks that attach to these notches on the vehicle. Just make sure it's lined up in there. I didn't have to loosen that back 10mm one, but I did loosen this front 1/2 inch one. So again, it lines up in those little notches. You put the nut on and secure it down. Don't do it too tight, but make sure that battery's not moving anywhere. It's really important. Another successful repair. The only thing to keep your eye on is if that battery light comes back on, as it could be that the battery was so dead that it actually caused damage. Likely not, but you need to keep your eye on it and make sure that battery light stays off. So if you found this content helpful, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions at all, please leave a comment and I'll do my best to get back to you.